Hey everybody, welcome to the Thru FM episode number 14. This is for May 2018. I hope everybody is having a nice spring leading us into summer. I'm excited to go to Gen Con later this summer. I know a lot of folks are raring to go to Origins in June and all kinds of other conventions. Dice Tower Con is going to be happening really soon. So I hope everybody's doing very well. We got kind of an interesting topic, I think, this month. I have done some research into publishing a game and kind of what all of that entails and what it involves, and had a lot of sort of interviews and picked a lot of people's brains about a lot of different things: artists, designers, publishers, distributors, all kinds of good stuff. So that's going to be kind of the main topic at the end of the podcast. And once we get through some reviews and things like that, then we'll jump right into that. Before I get into doing any reviews and talking about games, I just wanted to kind of mention, if you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, hopefully you'll have seen these. I have done 3 video reviews here in the past several weeks. So I kind of caught up, so to speak, and I'm kind of getting into this, hopefully, routine of a format of doing one podcast a month and then 1, maybe 2 video reviews a month. And I kind of took my highlights from the first couple of months of the year, Time of Crisis, Lords of Hellas, and Fog of Love, and kind of gave it the video review treatment. Now, it's a little bit different style of review than I've done in the past, a little bit more conversational. The rules overview is not super detailed, just kind of a general sense, kind of picking out the key highlights. So I will be doing a video review here maybe next week or the week after, kind of depending some other things going on. But of the kind of the number one game here for this group of games, which if you look at the show notes, you will know what it is. But if you want to keep it in suspense, then just kind of listen. But anyway, I've been pretty happy with that. I think there's some things I can work on, of course. It's kind of a new format, so I'm kind of just, but it's fun keeping it fresh and doing different things. And so any feedback is, of course, appreciated. Just to kind of jump into the little what I've been playing part, this is the sort of area where I cover maybe older games that have come back to the table. This is a little bit of a cheat because this is actually a very new edition. I'm not even sure it's quite out at the time of this recording, but it's a very old game, and this is High Society from Reiner Knizia. This is being brought over by Osprey Games. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll be flashing up some pictures of the art as I go along, but also have in the show notes a link to kind of like a little Twitter thread where I went through and posted the art for every single card in the game. Now, there's not a ton of cards in the game, so it's not that long of a thread. But the art and just the overall graphic design of this new edition it blew me away. Frankly, it's very well done. It's got a real interesting style. The way that the characters and everything are depicted in it is very, very interesting. I loved all of that stuff. Now, if you've not played High Society, I have done a video review of it several years ago. And this is one that's kind of stuck around in the group and floated around. And then I think I got rid of it maybe a year or 2 ago just because it wasn't coming out. But it was one of those where like, I wish I, hadn't gotten rid of it. And lo and behold, Osprey has come out with a new edition. It's a very, very simple auction style game. But even if you do not like auction games, I would still 1000% give this one a try. So what happens is everybody gets the same exact hand of cards in their hand, and they're just little money cards. So it goes from 1 to 25,000. And you skip some numbers in between. So you get like a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 6, an 8, and a 10, and all the way up to 25. And then you have a small deck of cards in the middle, and they're just worth victory points. And some of them are like multipliers, so you'll get a ×2 card, so you'll multiply whatever victory point cards you've gotten by the end of the game by 2. Some of them will actually cut your points in half, so you kind of bid not to get that. There's a -5 point card, and so on. So you just flip over a card, and then whoever's the start player will put down 1 or more of their money cards from their hand. So maybe I put down a 10. Maybe we flipped a 5-point victory point card over. I put down a 10. And then it just goes around the table. People can play cards from their hand. They have to beat whatever the highest bid is currently on the table, or they can pass. And then once it gets back to you, if you want to increase your bid, you have to then add to the cards in front of you. So if you wanted to bid, I don't know, like let's say 12 or 11, you can't pull up the 10 and then put down a 6 and a 5. You've got to only add to what you've got out there. So if you think about that, as you use up your lower numbered cards, use up your 1, your 2, and your 3, the jump that you can make in terms of incrementing your bid is going to be a lot. You maybe will be kind of forced to overbid. So you got to be very careful about using those low number cards. So you just keep doing that around and around until 4 cards that have sort of like a green sort of background color. Once that 4th one pops up and is just displayed, the round will immediately end, or the game will immediately end, and then you count up your points. So the timer, you don't really know quite when it's going to end, but once that 2nd and then 3rd green card come up, then you know, okay, maybe I've got to, make a run for one of these high value cards that might come up and not hold back money. The trick and the real key of the game, though, is once all the cards are out, then the player who has the least amount of money left in their hand, no matter how many points they've collected over the course of the game, they're automatically out of the game. They lose. So you don't want to spend too much money, because then if you have the least amount of money, then you automatically lose, because no matter how many points you have. So that's a really cool thing. And the game play usually takes 15 minutes, let's say. It can even happen quicker. And you get these really hilarious moments. And you wouldn't think so. I mean, you really would not think so from just a game where, like, I have money cards, I'm bidding on cards with points. That's all you're doing. But because you have just a very finite supply of money cards, and like I said, you got to watch the low number cards, and then you have to also make sure that you're kind of watching how much other players are bidding. So, oh, Billy was dumb. He went in for that multiplier, the 2 times multiplier, and he spent, let's say $35 out of it. 35,000, and okay, I've got some bidding room to breathe now. But you don't really know, because as you discard these cards, you're not really counting up, who. I mean, you could be one of those guys that counts money and stuff, but blah blah blah. But you don't really know what they've been holding back and stuff. You can kind of keep an eye on it, But so you do want to keep an eye on it. But this has these great, funny moments, and auction games are interesting. I don't like them all, but I do kind of like them. And I would say this game probably elicits the most laughter of any auction game I've ever played. And I've played several of them. So I definitely recommend people go out and pick this game. I don't know what the MSRP of it is. I think it's probably $15-20 you can find it for online. It's just a couple of cards and things. But there's a review I did of it. And definitely I think my estimation of the game has really increased over time. I don't remember exactly what I said on the review. I haven't gone back and watched it, but I do know that I've appreciated this more and more and more as the years have kind of gone by. So definitely take a look at High Society. So that's really the only sort of older game that I've been playing. I did have sort of a streak there where I was getting back into playing older games and bringing them back out to the table. But it seems like this last month, trickling back into the month before, it's been a lot of new stuff. And this is going to be an interesting month because there's a couple here that I would fall into what I call my blacklist, and all the way up to, I think, one of my favorite games of all time now. So this is going to be a lot of variance this month in terms of, my overall sort of mood about the game. So this should be interesting. So let's take a quick little break here, catch my breath, and then we'll jump into reviewing. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games? 8 games. Okay, so we'll try to be a little bit succinct. Okay, welcome back. Let's jump into the first game, and that is going to be Marvel Contest of Champions Battle Arena. This is a new game from Upper Deck, who has made another couple of superhero games that I've really enjoyed. They have the Legendary series, and they also have the new Versus System 2-player card game series, and I've enjoyed both of those immensely. This game, not so much. Now, if I had to sort of sum up this game, it would be kind of like King of Tokyo, but with superheroes. And the theme is actually pretty interesting, because normally, like, okay, all the superheroes are fighting each other, well, why? And that's sort of a a deal breaker or a weird bit of the theme, even though in the comic books they end up fighting each other, more often than they probably should. So you've been kind of like captured by the collector on the world, and then put into the arena. I don't remember if it was the collector, but the guy in Thor Ragnarok. So you've sort of been pitted to fight against each other, and you have these little standees, and it's kind of like King of Tokyo, where you're kind of moving around from different locations. In this case, there's multiple locations, and there's a lot of locations in the game, so the variability is there in terms of the different cards, and each location has a little ability and all that kind of stuff. And there's also a prison location, which is kind of put in the center. And I hate this location. I hate the whole mechanic of this, because I feel like if they could figure out, or maybe I could figure out a house rule to get around this prison deal, that might actually be a really fun game. So each player gets a nice little kind of player board with these kind of dials built in. So you're tracking your hit points and your victory points and so on there. And it's got a little player aid built in, very nice. Gives you a list of different special abilities that you can use. So if you're the Hulk, you get some big attacks and stuff like that. And the Captain America can like throw his shield into different locations and damage people at range and all that kind of stuff. And then you also have a hand of these cards as well that you can play. Now the whole mechanic is driven from like kind of a Yahtzee mechanic. You get a bunch of these specialized dice that you roll, and then some of the symbols you have to keep, and they kind of like lock, and then you can re-roll a couple more times. And so you're looking for different symbols to do kind of like some basic actions like move around and punch, but also look for combos of dice to activate some special abilities on your board or cards in your hand. And so you move around and kind of punch each other, and then you get victory points from moving. So the game kind of forces you to move, because you want to move from one location to another. And whenever you end your turn on a location, you get that many points. And then there'll be some other special effect on the different location that's either bad, or kind of beefs up your dice rolling, or mitigates the dice, maybe adds a symbol, stuff like that. But if you roll 3 of a kind of a certain symbol, then you go to jail. And it's the game that I played of it was that happened like a lot. So you would roll that, and then you would be sent to not jail but prison, and then you gotta kind of roll to get out of it, and it's this big stupid thing. And I hated that part of the game. Yeah, there were ways to mitigate it, and some characters kind of had a built-in mitigation where they only had to actually roll 4 to go to the prison and so on. And there were other ones where you would roll 3 and it would make an explosion, and that would affect people. And that one wasn't bad, because it was like, okay, you make an explosion and it does some damage and no big deal. But you just kind of move around and punch each other, and it was just like very tug of war-ish. And I feel like I was like, cool, this is like King of Tokyo, but it's superhero, so that's neat. But after playing it, I was like, this is why King of Tokyo is so good, is because you're either damaging the one person in the middle, or the person in the middle is damaging everybody. And that simple mechanic, compounded with all the crazy special effects that are just going to be completely different every game, that just makes it super fun and interesting and wacky and wild. Whereas this has the whole prison thing. You're locked in there. You're just kind of like attacking the leader and bringing him down. That doesn't have that weird, interesting thing of entering the city and leaving the city to kind of mitigate some of that. And it's just a bunch of tug of war back and forth. Oh, he's winning, I'll hit him, and I'll hit this, and kind of ping, 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 points back and forth. It just gets real sort of like rote and procedural. And there's no like mechanic to mitigate kind of what the cards do. It's like, I have these cards and I played them and I did them. And it would be more interesting, I think, where if like you use this big awesome attack that has like 10 damage, I'm exaggerating, but it does 10 damage, and then you can't play that card again until you play like 2 more cards or something. Like, I've had something built like that, so you had to be a little bit more choosy about doing your big effect, then that might be more interesting. And taking out the prison, I think, would be really good. But yeah, the components are pretty nice. The standees aren't huge like King of Tokyo, but they're fine, and there's some decent little art on them. It's not the greatest art in the world, in my opinion, but it's fine. And the special abilities and stuff are cool, but it just feels sort of like, I don't know. It doesn't. It feels like it could have used more work or something, because I feel like there is a good game, and it made me just want to play King of Tokyo, but with superheroes and just have different powers and stuff. So it just played those exact mechanics. Anyway, so that's Marvel Contest of Champions. Not a fan of that. The next game to talk about is Castell, and this is from Renegade Games. In this one, there were parts of this one that I liked. So what this this is an interesting thing which I didn't know about, is each player is sort of forming a troop of these Castells. And these are, that may not be the exact right word. I think they're called Castellants or something, or Castellers. And it's a tradition in Spain where you kind of wander around and you build like these giant like human pyramids and sort of stack humans in these different formations. And they go around and they kind of get prestige, and sometimes the whole crowd gets involved. I watched a couple of videos on it after playing the game, so that was a good sign. And they just do these cool, like kind of death-defying formations of human bodies. And they have like the big, strong, huge people at the bottom. And then you even get kids involved, so you kind of put them way up the top, and they're like, dozens of feet in the air and stuff like that. And you try to do it in such a way that they don't fall down, and they try to really push the limit. So these folks made a sort of a Euro game around that. And I got to say, the game is some interesting sort of Euro-y things with puzzles, because you get these different cards, and there's like different numbered cards. So like the 9s will be at the bottom, and you kind of rearrange your pyramids, and you try to meet like these different recipes. So you think of this, I got like some 9s, some 8s, some 1s and 2s, and I'm trying to build formations that are maybe like, 3 wide and 4 high, or maybe it's like a triangle. And so you're moving your troop around this board, trying to fulfill these kind of different patterns that come up. And you can sort of see all of the patterns in the game kind of laid out. So there's a kind of like the main scoring that happens every couple of rounds. If you've played In the Year of the Dragon, it kind of reminds me of that, where you can kind of see the plan, except instead of bad things happening to you like in that game, this is like, okay, this is my plan, and I'm going to kind of maneuver. You can move from different locations. You can buy new artists and get different things and run like little specials, and then you kind of work your path that way. But then there's kind of like little tactical things that you can do to score some of these sort of weird one-off kind of side quest kind of things. And here's the thing, that all is kind of neat and kind of interesting. It's a cool little puzzle to solve. But then you're just arranging these people in these weird formations and just trying to solve the victory point puzzle. And for some reason, myself and everybody at the table, to lesser or more degrees, thought that was kind of just a weird thing. That kind of mechanism was kind of weird to marry to this very, physical and dexterous type of activity, where you're like, it feels like the mechanics are just completely separate from the theme. Now, yes, you're stacking cards and getting like sort of different sized human beings and trying to get them and recruit them into their different formations. But I don't know, there was just a real kind of detachment for me and the other folks. And I think for me especially, I was kind of more in the end. Some of the other folks I played it with were like, yeah, I mean, they were totally on the same page as me, but it just kind of bothered them less than it bothered me. So it's just weird. Like you're kind of fulfilling these recipes and sort of logistically and tactically moving your troop around on this map. And it just really kind of pulled me out of what actually happens in real life. And that actually kind of compounded once I started researching it, because like, what is this? I've never heard of this sort of tradition. And it's really neat. It's just kind of a very niche tradition that that just happens in Spain, as far as I know. And so that's kind of a cool thing, that somebody would take that and be such a fan of that and appreciate that, hopefully, that they would kind of translate that into the board game world. But for me, it was just like, I don't know. It doesn't marry up nicely. So that was just a weird thing. Now, the puzzle and stuff, that was interesting. I thought it was all kind of well balanced and put together. But again, the puzzle to me was so dry on that side that the rest of it didn't hook me in. Because I like the theme, I like the idea, like I said, the tradition, that's cool, that's an awesome thing. And then I kind of like the mechanics. But those mechanics, I felt like, should be applied to something else, except for, of course, stacking and arranging the cards. But something you would arrange and move around and build, because it was a very tight, dry, economic kind of thing with this, really weird, funky tradition. And I didn't think the mechanics had any funk. So that's Castell. The next game is coming out from a company called Foxmine, but it's also a very old game that I hadn't actually played until I played this new edition. And I think it's out now, but not readily available. I think it'll be more available here leading up into Gen Con. And this is called Manhattan, and its designer is Andreas Seafarth, who did Puerto Rico and San Juan and some other games like that. And I think this won the Spiel des Jahres award back in 1994. And it's a very abstract kind of game. You have these little city boards that are in front of you on this main board, and you have these different size like building tiles. You have like size 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can easily see, you know, which is a size 1. It's these little stubby ones, and then you have some size 4s that are taller ones. And then you get a hand of cards, and based on your sort of orientation and where you're sitting on which edge of the board, you'll play these cards, and they'll show you where you can put a piece. But before you play in a round, you have to take and choose 6 of the pieces and put it on this little mat. And then you've declared, okay, I'm using these 6 pieces out of my whole collection, and these are the ones I'm going to be placing. What you're trying to do is take control and have buildings that you own on these different little regions of the city. And you own a building by having the piece that's on top of it. But when you add a piece to an existing sort of structure, an existing building, you have to have more of your stuff in that to be able to do it. So if I have like a size 1 and a size 2 right on top of each other, that means I have kind of like 3 points of influence or whatever in that board, so in that space. And so if Billy to my left, he plays a size 4 piece, that's fine, because then he has equaled or matched my building. So you just keep playing around. You have to kind of you know, try to play last and play on top of things, hold back your big pieces to kind of play at the end, and then sort of sneak in and capture stuff. Now, I will say this is a better 2-player game than it is a 4-player game. I played it 2 and 4 players. But it just feels, honestly, I hate saying this because I you know, a lot of people call games that I enjoy from back in the day dated, and I disagree. But this one feels dated to me. It's just like, it's not like a whole lot really going on. I could see this being a fun family game, but the problem is that I think with 4 players, it's too chaotic. It's just like so much is going on, and you can't really plan for anything. You know, there's some certain principles you can stick to, but you know, it's not really going to pay off for you. It's just somebody's going to end up having the right card location thing to play on top of you, and you kind of push your luck and say, I'm going to play here and hope that, you know, the next 3 players don't have this, and invariably somebody's going to have something and be able to play on top of it. So going early just stinks. You know, the start player moves around the board, but it just didn't really do a lot for me. It's definitely not terrible or anything. It's just real basic, real abstract, lots of kind of luck in the cards. With the 2-player, you can kind of play back and forth a little bit. You control 2 colors and stuff like that too. So you're kind of sort of moving and hedging your bets over in different areas, trying to control them. But it's just kind of a very bland thing, kind of keeping in theme with Castell. Just like, yeah, it's an abstract, and I like abstracts to a degree, but there was just too much kind of randomness in this for me to really get behind the abstractness of it. But I think, you know, back in the day it won the Spiel des Jahres, and I'm sure it was probably worthy of it because there was not very many games coming out that used, you know, any kind of modern design sensibilities back then. But, you know, maybe take a look at this one. It is pretty. I like the new kind of updated art. It's a little bit kind of a, I don't want to say, what's the word for this? Because sometimes you'll see something that's bright and colorful and vibrant, and it feels like almost tropical, but it's not tropical. It's like very summery, right? It's this very summery kind of beach feel. And I quite like that sort of look and feel. The old one is very, very brown and stodgy and probably a little bit more boring, I would say. But the building pieces have this nice kind of translucent color to them. I mean, it looks really like a weird alien world of buildings once you get them all stacked out there. But yeah, anyway, that's Manhattan. And so those are kind of the 3 sort of, you know, like Manhattan I'd maybe give a 6. And so that might be one that I would review back in the day and maybe tell people about because I can see the merit there. The other 2 I wouldn't, those would be blacklist ones. The Castell one's I feel a little bit icky kind of blacklisting that, but it's so detached. But now we're going to move into a couple of games that I quite enjoy. And then after that, of course, we'll get to some games that I really enjoyed. The next one here is Council of 4. Now, this is a couple of years old from, I think, Cranio Creations. It's now being re-released by Simon. Cool stuff. And they've kind of mini-fied it. They've got these real nice, colorful, chunky minis. And it has this really cool, interesting mechanics to this game. It's a tricky one to explain. I know there's some videos on it. Definitely go take a look at those if they sound interesting to you. But you have these weird combos that you build up. So you get these hands of different colored cards, and you have these giant-ish sort of politician minis in each of these kind of 4 sectors. So like a yellow, a blue, maybe another blue, and a brown one in one area. And then the next sector over has some different colors. And they sort of control these different columns of this board. And so in these columns, it's like a big map with these areas kind of divided up, and there's different locations in each sort of area. So think of them like these really strange looking like counties or states or something. And so if you want to do something, like you want to get access to some kind of like objective tile or job tile, you'll play some cards, you'll grab that, as long as they match, you know, that area that you're in, one of those, you'll grab that, and then you'll be able to, on your next turn, fulfill that, and then put in like a little worker. And then each of the spaces has a little action that you take. So it might give you some money, or do some other cool thing, or give you some extra cards and stuff like that. So as you start to put them out, you will want to kind of keep them adjacent. So maybe a couple of turns down the road, I put another worker in a city that's adjacent to the one I previously did. So I activate the city that I was in, and then you will daisy chain any cities that you have a worker in that are adjacent. So I put it in city A, that's going to trigger city B, which might be adjacent to city C, where I also have a worker. So that'll trigger, which maybe trigger anything next to it. And so on, you go in to activate anything towards the end of the game. Now, the real kind of interesting sort of dynamic of that is, okay, you think everybody wants to build in one spot and then kind of spiral out from there. And then by the end of the game, you're just doing these huge combos of like, you know, getting new cards, allowing you to do like a second turn, another action. But you also get a ton of victory points for sort of fulfilling, again, sort of these recipes. So there's, each of the cities is a different color. And there's like these 2 like kind of light blue ones, and they're like on opposite sides of the board. So if you go and chase those, you're going to get like 40 points right at the beginning of the game because you fulfilled sort of that completion. But if you fill up like all of them in the same column, then you'll get some points for being the first one to do that. So it's kind of a race to do that, and kind of put people kind of all over in different places where the game wants you to, and that's pretty static. But then you also want to keep them close to each other to do these cool little combos. So that is a very interesting sort of conundrum that you want to do. And you definitely want to chase those points earlier in the game, because there's sort of a generic victory point tile stack that give you extra points for completing any of those other general objectives. So the first person to complete any of the combo, you know, objective things, you get like an extra 25 points on top of that. So you want to do that super early, and then just kind of like tactically build adjacent and kind of hedge your bets and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's kind of the explanation there. It's definitely one that I think you want to see a video, because like all the objective spaces and, you know, actions in the cities are all shuffled up every game, so you get a good sense of how replayable it might be. It's really fun. You can definitely have a runaway leader, especially as there are new players in the game that don't quite see how the combos and stuff will chain together. I don't think that's a problem with the game. I just think it's something that kind of warn people about that, you know, it's going to take you like a play usually to figure out, okay, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have blocked, you know, Billy over there or whatever. So just kind of know that going into it. But I did enjoy this game. It was very, very fun. That's Council of 4 from Simon. Now, the next game I played, I've been talking about these for a while, since last year, and I finally got to play an Exit game, which is like an escape room kind of board game thing. And I've talked about my love for the Unlock games, which are escape room games that kind of come with an app that will help you kind of go through it. And every time I talk about these, and these are my favorite, you know, escape room style games, and they still are. But every time I bring it up, everybody says, well, you have to play an Exit game because that's my favorite. And usually they also like Unlock too. They just like Exit better. So that's a good sign, right? We both like this other thing that's the same a lot. You just happen to like these others better. So I did play the one. It was the Forbidden Island or Forgotten Island one, which I think is one of the easiest. It's like not the easiest, but it's down there towards the easy side. And I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I want to play another one to kind of give me a better sense of it, because it was just kind of it was a weird situation. It took us like 15 or maybe 20 minutes to get our first clue. And it was just because we couldn't really, for some reason, piece together how this sort of system worked in the way it did. But once it clicked, we kind of rolled right through the rest of the clues. And, and then we hit the little stumbling blocks there and there. But we understood how the system worked and how to sort of link some of the different puzzles and things in the game back to each other and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I don't really like, there's one thing I really like about it that I like better than the Unlock game, and there's another piece I don't like as much. And let's talk about the thing I really like. So the one thing I really like is the physicality of the puzzles. And that's one thing that Unlock lacks. It's all very sort of cerebral and, ethereal almost. Very much in your brain. But it is grounded, I will say, Unlock, in some sort of spatial reality, because you have physical spaces that you're sort of going in and visiting as you unfold these cards. But this one, you're going to take parts of the little journals and things, and it gives you little widgets and stuff like that you're going to be able to use, and you manipulate and bend and tear and all that other stuff. I don't want to spoil anything, obviously. So it's a very physical kind of thing, and you're still sort of grounded in some sort of space, but it is really more on the side of, here's a box of random puzzles, solve them. Whereas Unlock, and also the escape room board game as well, you feel like you're in a sort of a virtual space, a virtual world when you do that. So I like the physicality of it. Now, the thing I don't like about it, and I guess all of them are the same, is they have this little wheel to help you solve the puzzles. And they're just sort of like, everything kind of like has a little icon on it. And it makes sense because you're like, okay, this icon goes with this icon, so that gives me this number. And okay, that means I'm trying to find sort of abstractly the key combination to this lock. And then you turn these wheels and it'll tell you a card to go pull out of this deck, because everything's driven by a deck of cards. Similar to Unlock, but kind of different. And it tells you go fish out a thing, which will give you a new puzzle, which you'll then solve. And sometimes there are little pictures of locations and stuff. But in this particular one, it was just like, here's another chest. Here's another lock. Here's another thing. Or here's a map. And then you've got to go look in the journal at the map. So it just gets super abstract. And this one did. And that's why I want to try another one to sort of just see, okay, do it. Is this good? Is this better than Unlock, really? Or do I like Unlock more? Because frankly, a lot of people tell me they also like Unlock more than Exit 2. Not that it friggin' matters which one is better. They're both kind of fun. So yeah, I want to play another one. We had a good time with it. There were some weird, interesting, frustrating points of the puzzles, though, that kind of took me out of the theme. But I think now that we understand it from the beginning, I want to do another one. And I have my expectations set in the right way. So I think I can come and play it and have a great time with it. And really, I know what the game is trying to do for me. So that should be interesting. So that was Exit, the Forgotten Island one, I believe. So I would recommend it. If you haven't played the Exit games and you've played Unlock or Escape Room, the board game, those are the other two I really enjoyed. I've played several other escape room games, and I like them to more or less degrees. But for my money, Unlock and Escape Room, the board game, best two for sure. And then followed closely, very closely, I think, by Exit. But again, I want to play another sort of scenario out of that. Okay, so that was Exit. Now we're going to talk about 3 games. And these games, I really have no quibbles about recommending, frankly. So the first one we're going to talk about is from AEG, and it's called Space Base, which is a awful, awful, awful name. And the cover, I do not like the cover. And I only say that, I don't really care about a cover of a board game. Honestly, I don't care. You can paint it black. I do not care about the cover. The only reason I'm mentioning it here is because I think it's not good. And I think that's unfortunate, because if anybody goes into a store and looks at it, they'll probably walk right by it, unfortunately. But whatever, I don't really care about the cover. It just upsets me because the game is really fun and neat. And so I hope people do not just walk right by it. Now, the art inside and stuff is really cool. It's kind of I don't know how you would call it, almost like a cell-shaded, not quite, kind of flat, science fiction kind of thing. So the mechanics, though, these would, please do not run away when I say this. It's like Machi Koro, but better. Now, this is just way better than Machi Koro, though. Machi Koro's game I did enjoy. I thought it was fine. I know a lot of people like to hate on it. I think it's a fine game. It's not amazing, but with the expansion, I like it. And there was kind of a follow-up game also by AEG in this case called Dice City, which was very, very fun. But this, to me, blows both of those out of the water. And I kind of liken it to Machi Koro, but also like Craps, which Machi Koro kind of is like Craps too. The gambling game Craps. So what it is, let me explain the mechanics, is you get a row of 12 cards. Everybody gets the same 12 cards. And on your turn, you roll 2 dice. And then you get to activate either adding up the dice. So let's say I rolled a 5 and a 2. And I activate my number 7 card. Or if I want, I can activate my number 5 card and my number 2 card. So you can either split the dice or combine them and then, activate your card. Now, other players, when you roll on your turn, they can do the same thing with their row of cards. However, you have a board that you have these row of cards on. And after you activate your card, you can buy new cards. And when you buy it, you have to replace one of the cards in the slots. And each of the cards actually has a definitive slot that it goes in. So if I buy a card, it'll have like a number 3 on it. I've got to replace my number 3 card. I take that card that I am covering over, take it and turn it upside down and tuck it under my board, and there'll be a little action there at the bottom of the card. And any action of cards that you've sort of replaced, then they're going to activate on other players' turns. So you try to buy sort of random cards all over the map, at least to start, and then on other players' turns, you are theoretically activating your cards that you've tucked under more and more and more as the game goes on. You've bought more cards and stuff. And so the idea is to then just get 40 victory points and win the game. Now, the other thing you can do once you start to accrue money, because you get money out of the cards, you get income, which is going to then generate more money at the start of your turn. And you get little special abilities in the cards. There's so many special abilities. There's a lot of iconography in the game. It gets a little bit nutty when you first play it, but once you get through a play of it, you'll kind of get it. And then you get these little abilities that allow you to activate like adjacent cards and swap cards around, and you get like little charge tokens you put on cards, and then you can spring them off and then do cool abilities no matter what you rolled and all this stuff like that. So you get all these cool things and combos. But you're just trying to get to 40 points. And as soon as somebody gets to 40 points, you finish out the equal number of turns, and then whoever has the most points wins. Now you can also buy just straight up cards that are just victory points. These are special like yellow colored cards, and when you do that, you put them on a spot, but then you can no longer buy cards that give you that go in that particular slot. Now, other cards you can buy will generate points as you hit the numbers on the dice, but these, when you buy them, you just get an exact number of points, and they're relatively expensive, especially to start off the game. And then as you kind of go along, you can get some very high value points as well. Real simple game. You roll your dice, activate your cards. Other people activate their cards. Theoretically, you buy more cards. You buy a single card every turn if you can. And then the other thing is, when you buy a card, you actually spend all of your money. So if you have like $30 and you really want to buy the $5 card, you spend all your money. And then at the start of your turn, you get your income, and you probably have collected money on other people's turns. So it's not like you're going to start with 0 every time at all. So that's it's interesting. And but it's a game, this plays really, really fun, and it gets very exciting as people start to kind of race to get closer to 40 points. I don't know, it's very simple, and it's interesting because you can either combine and split the dice, and there's little abilities and things that are going to interact with that. It's just a great, fun little filler game. There's just a lot of excitement out of these very simple mechanics of roll 2 dice, combine them or don't, and then kind of do what the ability says there and buy a card that you think is good. And that's it. But it's super fun. I definitely recommend taking a look at Space Base. Now, the next game, I really went back and forth on this game and then my final game in terms of kind of the one that I would sort of single out and then, do a video review on exactly. And so this game here is it's from Plaid Hat Games. It's called Crystal Clans. And it's very much in the vein of like a Summoner Wars, and a little bit like a Mage Wars type of thing, where you've got a board, you've got stacks of cards, and you're moving them around. They're different creatures and wizards or whatever, and you're doing combat with other players, with one other player. It's a 2-player game, and you're moving around just trying to do stuff, and you get card combos and things. And then in this case, it's a very kind of small condensed board, and it comes with 6 factions of creatures. And I played through with 4 of them. There's 2 that I haven't played with. And you play and you get action points to spend and put out. And the whole game is driven by action points. What you're trying to do is move into an area that has a crystal. You spend action points to collect the crystal, and there'll be like some special ability usually when you collect the crystal that goes off. And then simply the first player to collect 4 of those crystals wins. Now, the whole action point system is really the key of the game. Is when I want to recruit a guy, it'll cost me some action points to spend them out, and I can add them to my stack. And if I want to move a stack or like a unit, it's going to cost me some action points, and maybe have special abilities that cost me action points. But as soon as I move and kind of push this little action point tracker, it kind of goes between the 2 players, and then once it gets to their side, then I'm done. I can't spend any more. So they get a few. So at the beginning, you're kind of just pushing and pulling kind of over that middle line back and forth until somebody does something really big. And, one thing that you can do that's really big is actually getting one of the crystals usually costs you like 8 or 9 action points. But as soon as you do that, you've pushed it way on your opponent's side of the board, and they get a whole bunch of action points to recruit a bunch of new creatures and units and stuff, and maybe do some cool special abilities. So you got to be really careful about when and why and how you are doing the really big move that you want to do. And that's really what the game boils down to. And you really want to understand all of the different decks that are in the game. And one thing that's neat about it is the decks that actually come with it. So it's not like these games where you get a deck and there's like the decks are like, I think there are 30 cards in a deck, and it's not like there's 30 different cards and you've got to learn all of them. There's usually like maybe 5 or 6 different cards in the deck, so there's redundancy. You're not going to see a lot of variance, but there's enough in there to keep it variable. And like I said, there's 6 factions that come in the game, and so you start to really learn and see how each of the factions work, and they work very differently actually. Like there's kind of an undead one where they'll like bring the creatures back out of the graveyard. There's a faction where all the creatures are very big and they're very expensive to recruit and to move around. And then, another one where there's a bunch of little kind of very small creatures that, maybe they're very fast and they don't cost a lot, but they're also not very strong. And so there's a lot of good asymmetry really in this game. And the other interesting part of it is when you build these units and you stack them, each of the characters, or most of the characters, will have an ability that's on their card, and if it's on top of the stack, then their ability is active. But as you get into fights, then you start to take damage, and you have to remove creatures off the top. And then other creatures underneath that, their abilities will become visible, and then their ability will kick in. So there's some really cool, interesting things you can do with that, and that's kind of sort of the next level that I would say you get to, because I played a few games of this, and that wasn't really something, definitely in the first game we played, that I was very concerned with, because I was just, it's a little bit overwhelming. It's not, too crazy complex, but then after a couple of plays, it's like, oh, if I tuck this one under here and it's on the bottom, or if this guy dies, then this thing will happen. I'll have this guy available, but I want this guy on top now because it makes this other thing cost less. You kind of get into the intricacies of all that stuff. So it's really, really cool. It plays very quick. I mean, once we got the hang of it, games were right about a half an hour or so. So it doesn't take very, very long. And I think it's kind of nice because it's not one of those like super investment heavy games in terms, well, there's no deck building at all yet. They do say in the rule book that there'll be more factions and sort of supplementary packs to build your deck. But right now I'm kind of glad that's not in there, because there's 6 factions in the game, and you can run all kinds of different combinations and pairings and things like that to see how different factions work against each other. But there's enough there. It's kind of a nice sort of entry-level-ish game to this sort of kind of tactical combat with cards and all that kind of sort of sub-genre that we have. But I definitely recommend this. This is a lot of fun, and it's very interesting. And even if you're kind of getting hammered, which can happen, especially if one player's playing that knows the game or the cards very well and the other's kind of new, that's certainly going to happen. But the games are over quick enough that you're like, okay, I kind of got it now, and then you can kind of go back and play it. So I definitely recommend this one. That's Crystal Clans from Plaid Hat. And the final game to talk about for this month, and you should be seeing a video review for it go up in a week or so, is also from AEG, just like Space Base was, and this is Thunderstone Quest. Now, before I get into a little bit of history of Thunderstone, before I talk about Thunderstone Quest, I want to give you a little bit of history about Thunderstone and myself. Thunderstone, the first one, did not like it whatsoever. Hated that game. I played back then. I played Dominion and I played Ascension and I loved those. And somebody said, you got to try Thunderstone. It's like a dungeon crawl with the deck building. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Good idea. I played it. Nope. Did not like it whatsoever. Felt very not thematic to me. I actually think Dominion is more thematic than Thunderstone. It just seemed very random and very deck buildy at the time and all that stuff. I don't want to belabor too much, but I didn't care for it. I never got a chance to play Thunderstone Advance, which was the second edition. And frankly, AEG sent this to me out of the blue. And I'm like, really? I thought I'd been vocal about my dislike, but obviously, not everybody watches everything and listens to everything somebody says. I was like, Thunderstone. Oh, okay. And I looked at it and I opened the box, and the box is gigantic. It's like as thick as Gloomhaven. And it has little minis in it. I'm like, oh, cool, little mini guys. And then it has these location tiles. I'm like, oh, okay. So instead of just like going to a dungeon and randomly hitting a monster, oh, I see you can kind of move around a little bit. Okay, interesting. So I kind of looked at the board. There's also a board for the village. I'm like, okay, that looks a little bit more in-depth than the original. I kind of started flipping through the rule book. And like, oh, there's a quest book. Okay, that's a good sign. And so I kind of got into it. I'm like, all right, let's give this a shot. I freaking love this game. This is so fun. This one feels like a dungeon crawl. Like it is. It feels like you're playing a dungeon crawl. Yeah, you've got the deck building, but the tweaks and the ways that they've changed the system, and they're very, very subtle in some ways, really marries itself well to the dungeon crawl theme. Now, if you played Thunderstone and you've played a deck building game, it's got those same mechanics. You've got like a market space. You can buy a single card every turn. You add it to your discard pile. When you run out of your discard pile, you shuffle your deck and so on. And you either go to the market or you go to the dungeon. If you go to the market, you're trying to generate money off the cards and buy new cards. Maybe recruit new heroes. In this case, you can level up heroes. You take out the level 0 adventurer, replace it with the level 1 fighter or mage, and then you can level those up. And you most of the time you spend experience to do that, and experience you get in the dungeon. So if you don't go to the marketplace on your turn, you go to the dungeon, probably because you've got a hand of a bunch of attack cards, and you can move then your little figurine through different levels of the dungeon. And you have to spend these cards with light, with little torches on them. But you can also get little tokens and buy those in town and spend those. And you move your fella around the dungeon there, and you fight a monster that's in there. And the monsters have cool little abilities and things that'll sort of mitigate damage. What room they're in will change things up a bit. It'll generate like treasure cards for you, so you get that whole like sort of a fun surprise of, oh, look, I got a treasure. Oh, it's some extra gold, or it's this cool magic hammer, and so on. And then you can also deal out side quests, so it gives you kind of a sort of a secondary objective, really. It's like, okay, if I do this, I'll get this crazy wand or this extra bunch of experience points, in addition to sort of tromping through the dungeon trying to chase down. And it has this little mechanism where you have these key cards shuffled in. Once the fourth one comes over, the boss flips up, and then everybody gets extra turns to fight them and stuff like that. But yeah, so just the kind of the changes in things, the different kind of subtle things you can do with some of the cards and the abilities and all those kind of real subtleties and details that I could get into. Those complement the dungeon crawl theme, that kind of fantasy theme of the game. And in this case, even though you're playing competitively, and a lot of times you'd think like, okay, the competitive side of this is kind of tacked on because you're all going to the dungeon together. You're all going in different, times and places. Why isn't this a co-op? I think they are actually developing a co-op for this, and it's ripe for it. But even if they never had a co-op for it, I'd want it because I think it would be fun, but I don't think it needs it whatsoever. Because you really are different bands of adventurers. So each player is basically running a troop, your deck of creatures and adventurers that are in your deck, and you're trying to be the best, most badass adventurer who makes the most money and gets the most glory and experience. That's it. You're all trying to do good, but you're all trying to be a badass. If you have ever read the comic book Rat Queens, which is a sort of, I don't know, it's kind of like a D&D comic book. It's similar to that, where you have these kind of different competing troops that are friendly with each other, and they don't really fight each other usually. Sometimes they do, like in a bar brawl or something, but you're all trying to do good for the most part and kill the bad evil mage or demon lady or whatever that's in the dungeon. And all of this stuff just works so well. So anyway, I'm going to do a video of this in a week or so. The art's good, the box is huge. I think they're doing like a follow-up Kickstarter to this. I think this was on Kickstarter. I don't know if they're doing a release or what. I think it was successful. And I know there's some expansions and things that you can get. And this quest book is neat. You can actually do like a campaign where you can keep a card out of the market in your starting deck. So each time you start the next game, you already have like kind of a little bit of your engine juiced up and going on. And I should mention that because that's one thing that with the other one, the first Thunderstone, is you'd start off and it would be kind of slow and boring at the beginning, and then you'd get going and the game would be over. This one, it can be very, very quick to get in and get going with the game and get fighting. This is one of the kind of the subtle things I'm talking about. And that's really cool because you have these kind of combo cards right out of the gate. You can go in and do like multiple actions on your turn and get a lot done early and get really spun up. And yet the kind of the flip side to that actually is the way that the game scales is very interesting, because when you play this as a two-player game, you get a little bit more opportunity to get more turns, theoretically, because the game length is not quite fixed, but it's ballpark the same based on how you get these keys out. So anyway, but math will tell you that more often than not, you're going to get more turns with a two-player game. So by the end of that game, in a two-player game, and this has just been my experience, is like you are friggin' monster. Your deck is just like, you're just slaughtering the dungeon, the lower levels of the dungeon. But when you play with four players, that same kind of average number of turns is divided up by 4. So you have to be a little bit smarter and more deck building efficient when you're playing with that number of players. The game's going to end quicker for you. You're not going to get as much done. But I like that. It's not a problem. I think that's actually a feature of the game. Because either way, you just got to kind of know your environment and know how you're playing. And again, with a two-player, you can just get your deck, your engine is just going through, and it's just a lawnmower going through the whole dungeon. And in 4-player, you got to be quick and efficient and chop. You got to get in there and get those points, because your score is not going to be as big as it was when you play a 2-player game. That's something you got to realize is kind of going into it. And you got to be able to kind of chase after and get after those points. And don't forget about your side quest, and you can join like a guild of like mages or guild of fighters, so that gives you kind of an impetus to gear your deck a certain way and all that stuff. But it's also very thematic, and they still have rules for like Thunderstone Epic, which I've never played, but I kind of want to just do the campaign. It's kind of like a little campaign system in the deck builder. But it's very simple and very efficient in terms of the kind of the overhead for doing that. So I definitely recommend this game. It's just really fun. And the other thing, I'm going to go off a little bit more about it, because like I said, this is a game I love at this point. The kind of the takeaway for me here is, you're trying to be efficient and win and have a well-tuned deck and get the most points. But the last game that I played with it, and I played it 4 times now, the last game I played, I knew I wasn't going to win, because my buddy next to me was, I could tell they were doing really well. But I wasn't sad because of that, because I had built my deck in such a way, I was building it smart, I was competitive, I ended up getting second place. And I built it in such a fun, kind of thematic way that I still had fun going through and doing the motions. I had this crazy wand that I would like hit with people. It was one of my side quest items, and it would like spit out these magic butterflies that did this crazy stuff. And I was still playing thematically, and it was tuned and married and joined at the hip with playing smartly as well. And like my buddy across the table in the same game, he wasn't playing well, but this is because he didn't really realize what was happening. And next time this happened, I think he would play much better. Is he got like these vampire cards that were just, they were nothing to do with like the central quest, but it was just something in the world. So it kind of grounds you in the world. It's not just going through, you know, these are the objectives, these are the monsters in this particular scenario, these are the points, you got to do this because of that and that. There's enough kind of extra ancillary things like these side quests and legendary items that can interlude themselves no matter which scenario you're playing. So again, that kind of grounds it in a world, and all of his adventures were turning into vampires and stuff like that. So this made it really fun, and he still had fun. He got creamed because they actually give you negative points, and so you got to play around that, but they're very powerful. So it's just those little kind of things on the edge, that kind of frosting on the cake type of stuff was really cool. Anyway, so that is Thunderstone Quest. So let's take a quick little break here, and then come back, and I'll talk to you about publishing games and what I've really learned about that, and sort of this idea that I had, and I'd run by some people, and kind of the information and some of the great discussions I've had. I just wanted to kind of broadcast that out and share that with folks. I thought I learned some very interesting things. Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of publishing games. A lot of sort of different topics. I'm going to talk about it holistically and maybe a little bit specifically. But before I get into my little bit, I want to call out a couple of Twitter threads by Tiffany Ralph. She's the One Tar on YouTube and also on Twitter. And I'll link these into the show notes there. She got into a very specific a breakdown of sort of the cost of publishing a game, kind of from a designer perspective and also from the publisher perspective, and mostly through the eyes of Kickstarter, from kind of taking an idea and bringing it finally to the customer. Very concise couple of threads. So I'm going to link those there. And she also, in addition to her YouTube channel, she also is working currently with publishers. She's worked with them in the past and stuff, and so she definitely is knowledgeable about all this stuff. But I'll link those there, and she explains them in much more detail and much more succinctly and efficiently than I can rambling on a podcast. I definitely recommend folks just click over to those. They're a very quick read, but they're, you know, one of the nice things about like a Twitter thread, I'm kind of back and forth on the whole concept because it's weird, but in this case, and in a lot of cases sometimes, it's very sort of very bullet pointy, bam, 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 bam. And I'd highly recommend folks take a look at that. So what kind of spun this up was, okay, so I was watching this thing called Robert Kirkman, History of Comics. Now, Robert Kirkman is the guy that writes Walking Dead, and he had a 6-episode series on AMC, I think at the end of last year, about various comic book creators. So they talked about the creators of Superman, of Wonder Woman, and so on. And the final episode was about a company called Image Comics, which started up in the 90s. Some of these artists and writers had broken away from Marvel and DC because, frankly, they weren't getting paid what they should because they were the creators of the work. Although, you know, having the name Spider-Man in the book also sells a lot of comics. A lot of people were buying them because the stories were good and the art was good. So they broke off and made Image Comics. They made Spawn, Savage Dragon, Wildcats, and a bunch of other stuff that nobody remembers. But Image is still around. They have some great comic books that they read, Walking Dead. And one that I like is called Saga. I think that was done by Image. Image. I think that's Saga. Why the Last Man and stuff. So they do some real kind of off the beaten path sort of storylines that aren't like superheroes or straight sci-fi. But anyway, so the concept really hit me, and it feels like it was kind of an idea that's been in the back of my head that sort of sprang to life as I watched this episode. And I was a big fan of the comics back then. I was in high school when this stuff was going on, and I thought, you know, hey, what would that look like in terms of the board game world? Now, the board game world is already very diffused and segregated across tons and hundreds of thousands of publishers already. It's not like we have two big publishers and that's it. I mean, we've got Asmodee and Hasbro and stuff, sure, but we've got your Stronghold, we've got your Tasty Minstrel, we've got your Well, I was going to say Plaid Hat, but they now are owned by Asmodee. You've got your Stonemaier games, your Cephalofair games, which is just Isaac Childress, and so on. You've got tons of smaller companies, Splotter, everything. I can go on and on and on. So we're kind of already in that position. But I was thinking, okay, well, those are publishers. Most of the time, a designer is like pitching to a publisher. In some rare cases, like in Jamie Stegmaier's case with Stonemaier, that was very small. It was basically him. He started with Viticulture. He moved into Scythe and other games. So this is very much kind of a one-man band. And I started to kind of poke around and talk to different people about, okay, so what if we could put more emphasis here on the designers and the artists? Because the designer gets about 5 to 10% of a royalty on the game being sold. And you think, okay, well, that's not really a lot for the design of the game, which is really the core spirit and heart of the game. You got no design, you got nothing. You could have a design with mediocre art, and there would be some people that would ignore it, and there'd be a lot of people maybe that would play it, give or take. But you'd have the game there, and the design is the key, right? You can sort of sub in a publisher or sub in component quality and stuff like that. But the design is the key. Okay, I'm not trying to sell those other things short at all, because you want good art. You want good component. You want good sort of ergonomics, the look and feel, touch and feel, and how everything kind of, the graphic design and all that stuff works together and becomes a cohesive game. All that stuff is super important. But I thought, okay, let me sort of push the buttons there and see, because there's got to be games that some designers have in their brain that they want to get out. And there's a lot of people that do that. They self-publish and they're good and they're golden. A lot of people don't want to spend time doing that. The Kickstarter and stuff eats away at their design. They want to just design the game. They don't want to publish and deal with Kickstarter backers that are angry over nothing, and that kind of stuff. That is a drain. That will suck the life out of you. I mean, if you don't think that will, it 100% will. It gets in the way of the creative process. I mean, that's a business side of it. That's not the creative side of it. The business side of it, you can scale and automate and put on a factory assembly line. The assembly and manufacture of the games and the shipping of the games, there's nothing creative about that, but it takes you so much time and it just eats up your soul and your time. The creative side of it is the part you've got to sit there and meditate on and play test and sit there and come up with ideas and research and kind of find your muse and all that kind of jazz. So I thought, okay, so what if we could sort of move from a publisher as sort of the owner of the game and move to a publisher as a service? That was kind of the idea. Whereas the publisher would, help run the Kickstarter, worry about the logistics and all that kind of stuff. And the designers then would be more married to it. They would get a greater royalty out of it. I wasn't really worried about numbers. I was thinking, okay, let's kick the designer up to like 30%. And then you would get the artists more involved. You give them a higher royalty because the artists all get like a commission, like 99% of them. You get a commission for a certain number of pieces of art. Let's say you get 50 pieces of art on cards and rule books and things, and so they get them several $1,000s for that, probably, depending on the size of everything. And then, that's what they get, and they move on. They don't really own the rights to anything. And that was the other key to this, and the key to the Image Comics back in the 90s was owning the rights to your creation. Whereas, like in board games, like somebody has, they give me the design for, I don't know, Tigris and Euphrates. And that publisher then owns not necessarily the IP rights, but at least like the license to publish that IP in a sense. It's a little bit more to it than that, but that's basically what it is. They kind of own the license to that for a certain number of years, and then it'll revert back to the designer, and they can go shop that license around for another publisher if they want to, or go back to the same one. But in this case, I was saying, okay, what if you made it, and then the designer immediately, as soon as the game is published, the license reverts back to them. That's all it would be. It would kind of serve as sort of an incubator, kind of a Kickstarter thing. And so most of the feedback of folks that I talked to were like, well, that's really good. I mean, because obviously, yes, we want more money. That would be great because I can have a design that wants money, and it gives me more money, and that's great. And I'd be a little bit more in tune with the creative process as well. And hey, I get my IP rights back. So let's say we have a smash hit, and then Asmodee wants it, then it's fine. Yeah, go take it to Asmodee. That's fine. I mean, theoretically the publisher would have gotten their money out of running the service, and they take their cut, and and enough to pay bills and actually publish the game and all that stuff. And so that was very enticing. I talked to maybe a half a dozen designers and maybe a little bit less than that in terms of artists. And even some of the publishers and the manufacturers and the distributors I talked to thought, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. And even the artists thought, okay, that seems like that'd be pretty cool, because they don't usually get a royalty bit of it. And the sort of one thing that kind of grew out of this idea was actually marrying together an artist and a designer early on in the process of creating the game. Because one thing that happens with games is you have kind of all of this, like this huge army of designers all out there trying to innovate and build the next cool mechanic or treatment of a certain genre or theme, kind of off in their own world usually. Or you got some folks that like work at Fantasy Flight or as at Asmodee or something, or work with one or two publishers more often than not. But you have them there, and depending on the publisher, like let's say I have a design and I give it to the publisher and they take it, and I don't hear from them. They sign it until maybe a couple of emails back and forth for a year, and then eventually the game comes out and I'm like, oh, look at the art they applied to it or whatever. Whereas another publisher might let the designer have more say and get more involved and get in tune with the artist early on and have more input into the design and more input into what they call the development of the game, because the publisher oftentimes will take the game, run it through several play tests on their side within kind of an in-house or hired third-party developer who may or may not work with the designer closely. They may not. And then, they get the game out on the other side. But I was thinking of, if you start early in the process and you get a designer married with an artist and they have a design, they can really build up a grounded world for this game to live in, or at least a cohesive and integrated theme where the mechanics and the art and everything are together. And the art has a little bit more creative input, not like paint me an elf, and so you can have a little bit more creativity and innovation in terms of the art side of it. And so that was all very, very interesting. And so then I started to talk to more of the logistics side of it. I'm thinking, at this point in my process, I'm thinking this is great because, I'm a software guy and I can kind of look at automating things and I can be very procedural and businesslike. I think if you've seen some of my reviews, you'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then, get into that and deal again with the manufacturer and the distributor and just work with that. And then act as a sort of a developer a little bit, feedback in terms of the play testing. Because at this point at the thought process, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I want the game to be something I think is good, right? So that's really the trick. But then on the other side of my head, I'm thinking, that doesn't matter because I'm just providing a service. It's really the artist and the publisher that are putting the game out as themselves, and it's being published through this entity, call it Drive-Thru Games or Walking Fish Games or whatever. And it's just like, oh no, we're just a vehicle here. And I'm running the Kickstarter and answering questions and logistics and what stretch goals are what and all that stuff. And that sort of just insulating the designer and the artist from that. But it also should be something I wouldn't want to put out a pile of crap too. So that was an interesting sort of conundrum when looking at it as publisher as service. So anyway, I talked to one distributor type folks, and in terms of like the warehousing and that side of it, and just the fulfillment and the shipping end of the Kickstarter. And I talked to the folks at Panda Game Manufacturing. And here's where kind of the rubber meets the road. This is the point of me sharing this on the podcast. Is this point is Panda does a fantastic job. They will friggin' like hold your hand through the process. And as I started to talk more and more with other publishers and things and talk with Panda, who are fantastic, I realized that this service is somewhat provided to on different levels by these different game manufacturers. And I didn't talk to any other manufacturers outside of Panda. And I think my hunch is that they do this the best. Where I actually, let me just give you a little bit of the process here. So I went into the Panda's website and I started just like looking at their forms and things. I'm like, okay, let's pretend I wanted to make a card game. And I filled out their form of, it has 50 cards and this and that, and the rule book's this size, and there's a punch board with some tokens. And I filled it out and sent it in. I'm like, oh, well, okay, I just sent a proposal to Panda. So I did another one. And I was like, okay, this is a bigger box. It's more of a board game size box with like, 8 stacks of cardboard token boards and stuff like that. And there's a board and player boards and all that stuff. And so they got back to me and I said, well, okay, well, here's where I'm at. This whole idea that I just explained to you about working with artists and designers and they were very, very excited. And they were like, that's really cool. And that's a great idea. And I really started to realize that they do this. So they won't like run your Kickstarter and worry about your shipping and your fulfillment and all that stuff. For that, I talked to the folks at Greater Than Games, and it's well known that they have a giant warehouse. They do their own stuff through there, but they also act as a shipping and fulfillment. And I think like Fun Again is starting to do that. And so there are people out there that you can get this done with. So these exist. They're tangible. You can achieve and reach out to them and get in their schedule. But the takeaway for me was like how involved Panda Games Manufacturing actually is and can be with the process, and how helpful they are, because we talked about all kinds of stuff in terms of cost saving and the efficiency of like doing certain kind of tokens versus another, and even with miniatures, like if you do this kind of miniature for this kind of game, this makes more sense and this will save you some money, whereas if you're doing something a little bit different, that's actually going to cost you a lot more in terms of the molds and all that. But he really kind of rattled off a lot of things that were concerning to me. Like if I was imagining myself being involved in this position and acting as sort of a buffer and a shield for the designer and the artist, Panda really, I thought, did a fantastic job. And other manufacturers might do that as well in terms of working with you, getting the art files right and all that kind of stuff, and really making you think about how you're packaging and putting together this product at the end of the day. So this was just all kind of very interesting sort of process to go through. And again, I want to refer back to those 2 Twitter threads that I linked there from Tiffany, because I think if you kind of marry this concept that I've talked about a little bit, and then some of the dollars and cents that she outlined there were matching up 100% with what I was talking about with the folks involved. And so you get a real sense of all of the kind of hoops and steps to get a game from that kernel of an idea to and out the door to a customer, and all of the kind of levels that have to be involved. And so it kind of circling back to Panda, though, I just wanted to stress, like, if you are an artist or a designer listening to this, hook up with your buddies, hook up with your friends that are also artists and designers, and find somebody. Maybe, I know running a Kickstarter is a giant pain, but if you have this idea for something, for a game, don't worry about fulfilling like the next thing in a publisher's line, or hooking up or lining up with, and I'm just going to pick on Roll and Write, like, oh, everybody's doing Roll and Write, so I've got to come up with a Roll and Write game, and then find the publisher that hasn't published a Roll and Write game right now, and fit that line and all that stuff. That's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. That's cool. I mean, that can be a fun process for sure to kind of crack that nut on Roll and Write and see what hasn't been done yet. But I'm just saying, I think it's possible. I think it's there. It's there to be had. If you've got a designer and an artist together, and you can find somebody to sort of that you trust, that could run interference, run the Kickstarter for you, run the communication with Panda, and give them a cut of your game for doing, pay them for helping you do all that logistics. Get in contact with somebody like a Greater Than Game or a Fun Again or some other type of distributor person, and that stuff. And you can sort of build up your own little studio of people, that can do that, where you have sort of a publishing house. And I know this exists in some facet, but I don't think it's not a frequent occurrence. And you can have a house like an Image Comics type of thing, where it's a bunch of designers and artists together with a couple of people that, they're not publishers, they're not dictatorial types of publishers. They're saying, this is the style of game that I want to run, and this is what I'm going to do because this is my brand as a publisher. You can just run these as a service, and if your vision and your artistic vision is cool enough and fun enough, and you execute on it, then it can become very successful. Because if you look at Image Comics, look at the diversity of books that is out now with Image. You can't look at Image and say this is their brand, other than, you know, they try different things, and they have for the most part, I think. I don't really, I'm not into comics as much as I was, but for the filter that I have, that's very surface level, they put out a lot of cool, weird stuff. That's awesome. And there's a ton of other comic book companies like that. In board games, I don't think we have that. You know, we have publishers that do awesome stuff, and I look forward to that. But it's all like one sort of sound coming out of it. Like, you think it, like the Cool Mini or not, they have a certain sound that comes out. But they get diverse. I mean, they have like your Blood Rage and your Rising Sun, but they have your Council of Four and your Ethnos and stuff like that. So they're bouncing around. I don't want to say like this doesn't exist and the publishers aren't doing what they could here, because they certainly 100% are. But I also think if you want to push and scratch that itch for some really drastic innovation, I think this kind of approach might be something worth exploring, where you can really take home and drive something like a Fog of Love, right? Now, they had to go and publish the game themselves, and I'm sure they had help and stuff like that, but that's the only game to come out of them so far. Whereas if they had to do less of that, if you had sort of a co-op kind of attitude here of artists and writers, or writers, artists and designers and other artists and other designers all kind of working together collaboratively together, not necessarily beholden to a certain degree to the publisher's sort of brand and their molding, I think we can get some really cool, interesting stuff. So that's all I got to really say about that. And so that, I think the sort of the dynamics of that process and some of the mentality and some of the sort of, you know, the handcuffs that are sort of around the process, and by necessity, the publishers have certain things that they want to do and that they're branded for, and they have certain pipelines that they want to serve. And the extreme example is that is Fantasy Flight with all their Star Wars stuff. That is a worthy market, obviously, and it's going to, you know, they're going to pump through and serve that market. But I think there's something good could come out of that approach, I think. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that. And definitely take, again, a look at Tiffany Caires' her Twitter threads. It'll give you kind of a sense of the way the money moves through all of that process. So I think if you can reevaluate that pipeline, then I think there's some possibilities there, for sure. And everybody that I talked to not everybody, most people seemed to think that was pretty good. A lot of people, a very small portion of it, just to kind of talk out of the other side of this and sort of play a little pro-con idea, they thought everything's fine as it is, and that wouldn't really work, because most people, as designers and artists, this is not their day job. The majority of people, it is not. So I think for that kind of situation, they're happy to get one or two designs published, or a handful of designs, or get their art into a handful of games among the other things that they do art for. So that's fine as well. So, but I'm just saying the protagonist in that case for the industry is the publisher. And I'm not saying that's bad at all, because I love games, and there's several games that come out every year that I love and I can't wait to play. But it would be interesting to sort of switch the protagonist by rearranging that pipeline in a sense. And I think you want to be careful about it, because you're also, you know, there's going to be some money investment, stuff like that up front to get art and, you know, roll up a Kickstarter and get all of that kind of stuff going. But that's kind of the details of that. Anyway, so that was just kind of a rambly topic, and something that I had a lot of fun kind of researching and talking to different folks about over the last couple of months, really. So yeah, any comments or feedback on that are definitely welcome. So that's about it as far as a off-topic random thing. I really have enjoyed the Cobra Kai on YouTube Red, and I have said before, I'm not a fan of nostalgia. In general, I don't enjoy it, even though I don't mind watching things that are old. But the nostalgia bit where people kind of like hang their hat on stuff, I don't really go for. But this one, I bought into a lot of the nostalgia in this, with this whole like Karate Kid revival thing. It was good though because there was a lot of modern stuff too. So I think if you're a younger person, or if you have kids in high school or something, they might enjoy it as well. Look good. A lot of humor, a lot of seriousness, a lot of good treatment of sort of nostalgia versus modern look at things, and really fun kind of idea there. And mostly it made me kind of nostalgic for, because I kind of grew up down near that area, just north of LA, in Ventura County, and so it kind of made me more nostalgic for sunny weather and down there and stuff like that. But yeah. So anyway, that's kind of just a little random tidbit at the end of the podcast. I hope folks enjoy their month. Look forward to 1 or 2 videos probably coming up before the next podcast. One of those will definitely be Thunderstone Quest. But other than that, take care of yourselves. All right.